I think we've seen a remarkable diplomacy by Pakistan, which has been recognized the world over. And again, when deadlocks emerge, Pakistan is able to move the process forward. So far as your question is concerned as to what are the sticking points now, and have the position of the two protagonists of this war, I would say, narrowed down compared to before? Well, first of all, the sticking points, which I have been actually saying consistently, remain the nuclear issue primarily, and linked to that, of course, the sanctions relief, the unfreezing of assets, and the status of the Strait of Hormuz. I think these are the key questions. And while sort of, like a lot of observers have been sort of, like wondering that when, like, for instance, when President Trump floated the idea of Abraham Accords, or sort of, other issues they felt were perhaps more important. The deadlock or the stalemate, whenever it has occurred, in my view, has been on these three issues. And that viewpoint has been vindicated by the recent statements, particularly the one emerging from Iran, from MOHSIN, the National Security Advisor, who mentioned about the unfreezing of assets in particular. So I would say that yes, starting from the 15 points on the one hand, 10 points on the other, we're now down to 3 points. So that speaks for the diplomacy that has taken place so far, number one. Now, these points are critical. There's no doubt about that. And it's also true that the mechanism is going to be that there's going to be perhaps some framework of understanding, possibly an MOU, and then a 30 to 60-day period during which the sort of important issues or sort of these critical issues will be discussed in detail. Because when we say nuclear issue, what are the actual points? Number one is, there were many, but eventually it boiled down to two. Number one, the suspension, how long it is going to be. Suspension of what? Suspension of nuclear enrichment. That is what the US has been calling for. That is what they say the JCPOA did not provide for, because JCPOA stipulated or allowed uranium enrichment up to 3.67%, which is the limit for civilian nuclear program. But the Americans and the Israelis, and Israel is an important part of this war, but they're not on the negotiating table. So America has to take them along. So for both Israel and America, this is critical, 0% enrichment for at least a certain time period. So that is suspension. Whether that's going to be for 20 years, which was the US preference, or 3 to 5 years, which was Iranian preference, perhaps somewhere in the middle. Perhaps the two sides are closer to that, much closer than before. It could be 10 or 12 years. The other issue is of the 60% enriched uranium, the 440 kilograms, which President Trump has been referring to as the nuclear dust. And that is why he talks about the dust and dollars. So the dust being the enriched uranium, which is enriched to the tune of 60%. Now that is very high. That's very close to the nuclear grade uranium, which is 90%. And from 60% to 90% is sort of, in technological terms, it's much, much easier than it seems. Now, where is that uranium? That is most likely, it is buried or in those destroyed nuclear installations in Natanz, Isfahan, and Fordo, which the Americans destroyed superficially, throwing those huge bombs using B-2 bombers. But because these were like sites deep down in the ground, so it is and intelligence has verified that, intelligence and satellite pictures, that the structures remain intact, perhaps 40 to 50 feet under the ground. After that, the structures remained intact, and the uranium, which is in the shape of gas, locked in cylinders, is there very much. And actually, the Americans and the Israelis felt that Iranians were close to retrieving that. That is when they decided to attack. So that is there. What happens to it? Of course, Americans wanted Iranians to hand it over to them. Iranians didn't want that. They said that we could probably downblend it in Iran in presence of the international inspectors, the IAEA inspectors. Now what we hear is it might be handed over to a third country. So that's where we are. That could be likely China or Russia. But in lieu of that, Iran wants, first of all, unfreezing of assets and upfront, and that's the word that I've been using. They wanted upfront a significant portion of those freezed assets released. Their preference was about $24 billion, perhaps. Americans at one point, the figure from the other side was perhaps $6 billion. But that is where the issue is stuck, the timing of it, the sequencing of it. The Americans want it to be sort of, tied to certain verifications, certain understandings. The Iranians want it upfront. That is one. The other is the sanctions relief. The Iranians wanted, again, upfront sanctions relief. The day the agreement is signed, they want their oil to be sort of unimpeded sort of sales of the oil. They want their exports to be unblocked, which have been blocked by the US blockade of Iran, the naval blockade. The third thing is the Strait of Hormuz. Now, Iranians are willing to unblock it, but the problem is that they still want to regulate it. They said we will not levy or impose tolls there, but at the same time, we would we would delineate the designated routes, and we will regulate the flow of shipping. This is what the Americans do not want. Actually, this is what the world doesn't want in general, because that would be a violation of international law. The Chinese don't want it. The Europeans wouldn't want it. The Gulf countries wouldn't want it. So that is where the things are presently. In all these points, there have been some flexibility shown by both the sides, and the positions are not as diametrically opposite as they were some weeks ago. But at the same time, they are not close to an understanding either. And that is why this diplomacy becomes very important. The diplomacy being conducted by Pakistan, Pakistan's interior minister going there, taking those very important messages from the leadership of Pakistan to the leadership of Iran. So let's keep our fingers crossed. Let's hope that pragmatism will prevail in Iran, as much as we hope that it prevails in Washington. And the coming days, we'll see at least an initial framework of understanding being signed. Now, some observers would say that the Lebanon issue is important, and that's tied to it. That may very well be the case, but I would say that it is not critical, because if you would recall, just before the Islamabad Accord, Iranians were insisting that unless there was a ceasefire in Lebanon, they will not come for the talks. But then they relented, and they did come to Islamabad. They did travel to Islamabad for the talks, despite hostilities raging in Lebanon. So what I feel is that although it is important for Iran, but that is an issue where they could show some flexibility. But the critical issue for them is to get upfront unfreezing of assets, upfront sanctions relief, and they are also very much insistent on having some sort of regulatory control over the strait. Yes, it seems that because that issue is maybe is not a make or break, but at the same time, it is very important. So Pakistan has been undertaking that diplomacy as well. And before that, the Americans have done that. They invited the Israelis, they invited the Lebanese government representative, both to Washington, the US State Department, and they've been having negotiations there. But the point is that the fighting is not between the Lebanese government and the Israelis. The fighting is between Hezbollah and the Israeli forces. And that is why Hezbollah's agreeing to some sort of ceasefire with the Israelis was much more important than the Lebanese government entering into any agreement with the Israelis. And that is why Pakistan has to get involved. Why? Because, Hezbollah, the Americans have declared it a terrorist organization. So they wouldn't invite them, or they wouldn't really get involved in any negotiations with them. But Pakistan, Pakistan has channels with Iran, and Pakistan has channels which could help smoothen out things, at least to the extent that the Lebanon issue does not impede an agreement, or at least a framework agreement on other issues. Now, these countries, of course, they have suffered very much from this conflict. And it's very unfortunate because they had no part in it. They have no position in it other than that they want peace. But we've seen that in terms of Iran's retaliation, 85% of the projectiles that Iran has targeted have been at the Gulf countries. Only 15% have been targeted at Israel. And why is that? Because logistically, it's so easy for them. And also because those countries, they have American bases. Now, the point is that these Gulf countries, what would they want to see? Because these countries, it's not just a loss in terms of any infrastructure damage or oil installations damage, or a loss of life that they're taking. It's a great deal of reputational loss as well, because these countries, their economies are built on this premise, many of these countries, that they are safe havens. For instance, UAE, for instance, Bahrain, to a certain extent, Oman. Even Saudi Arabia is trying to diversify its economy, and it's projecting it as a safe haven for global investments. So the reputational damage that they have taken is immense. And it is very important for them this war stops, and not only stops, but rather there is some sort of a stability, a durable stability mechanism after that. So this situation does not arise again. They don't want any deja vu. So that is why what they want to see is, first of all, an end to this conflict. And secondly, they would want to see some framework, some regional framework, whereby it is ensured that such conflicts do not arise in future. For that, people have been or observers have been making a lot of conjectures or forecasts. Some have been wondering whether this is end of an era and there will be a totally a new security paradigm in the region, and this would transform the whole global security architecture. Now, and this is perhaps they think that this is the end of American presence in this region. I do not think so. I think the US defense presence in the region would stay intact. The basic security infrastructure of this region, in terms of the US bases that we have, seen over the last so many decades, they will stay there as well. But at the same time, these countries would endeavor to have a multi-layered defense. And for that, they could enter into agreements or frameworks with other countries, middle powers, especially. For instance, the type of framework Saudi Arabia signed with Pakistan, SMDA. Other countries such as Turkey, such as Egypt, could be involved in this. There could be some framework which could directly or indirectly involve the Chinese as well. But the point is, it would be multi-layered. It would be built on what they already have. It will not substitute it. And they would all, these countries would also want to have like some sort of a peaceful coexistence with Iran, because, look, they do not really have like territorial disputes of the kind that, that would push them towards a perennial hostility. They do not really have a conflict of interest or some historical enmity which cannot be resolved. It's not the situation that Iran and Israel have between them. It's a very different situation. These are all Muslim countries. And they have all the reasons to coexist peacefully and in terms of a framework of mutual respect. So perhaps these countries would like to move forward on that as well, some sort of a rapprochement with Iran. So I believe that we will witness a great deal of diplomacy, not just that what we have witnessed, during this conflict, but post-conflict as well. And we would see some very important changes taking place. But like I said, they would not replace entirely the existing security architecture. Rather, those changes will refine it.